Hey friends, welcome back to Fantasy Watch. It is the end of Q1. Well, Q1 technically ended a few weeks ago, but that doesn't matter. So we're going to talk today about my top 5 books from Q1. I had a banger of a reading quarter. I read so many good books, but I have narrowed it down to 5, but I want to have one honorary mention, but we'll get into that as we go forward. I ended up reading something along the lines of 42 books in Q1. It was a really massive reading month or reading quarter for me. February was my biggest reading month of all time. I think I got in 20 books in February, and I have just been having so much fun. And I think part of that is when I started the year, I was thinking initially I was going to jump into some heavier and bigger series like Malazan and Robin Hobb, and I just wasn't feeling it. We had a really rocky start to our year this year, and I needed something that was just easy to digest, easy to get into, and I found some really great books, and we're going to talk about them today. If you've been following my last few videos, it's probably not a surprise that I've been reading a lot of romantasy lately, so there's going to be a couple romantasy books on this list. Surprise, surprise. But in addition to some romantasy books, there are some regular fantasy books, and one book that was so genre bending that it is fantasy, but it really could be a bunch of other stuff too. The first book that I am going to talk about is by one of my all-time favorite authors, and that is Mr. Lord Grimdark himself, Joe Abercrombie, and that book is The Heroes. The Heroes is the second of the standalone books in Joe Abercrombie's standalone trilogy, I guess you could say, and this for me is possibly my favorite book of his that I've read so far. I've read 5 books of his, and I just loved everything about this from start to finish. It is Joe at his absolute best, and it is everything you could want in a book. This book is over the course of 72 hours. It is just 72 hours, this book. And it is such a character-driven story that it really does allow Joe Abercrombie to shine. It had some of my all-time favorite characters from the First Law world, the First Law universe. Bremer Dangorst is up there for me in terms of humor with Sandan Gupta. I was cackling when I was reading his inner monologues. No one does an inner monologue like Joe Abercrombie. And this book just gave me everything that I wanted. It was my first 5-star read of the year. I had a great time, really start to finish. There was not a single moment that I was like, not working for me. I loved the whole thing, which was really interesting because this book takes place in a location called England, which in the First Law trilogy, those were the spots that I found to be the most boring. So I thought it was really interesting that I ended up loving this book as much as I did, but the character work really is just so excellent that I couldn't give it anything other than 5 stars, and it was definitely one of my top 5 books of Q1. The next book that I'm going to talk about is also not a romantasy book, but it is The Bone Clocks by David Mitchell. Now, this was really interesting. I was sitting back and when I was thinking about what my top 5 books were going to be, I kept thinking, what are books that have really resonated with me and stuck with me? And The Bone Clocks has definitely been one of those books. This was such a strange book that it took me a while to get into it, and when I got into it, finally, I just allowed myself to go on this journey that David Mitchell wanted to take me on, and I valued and respected so much what he did as an author. The Bone Clocks is a story that starts in the 1980s and is 5 different POVs that are all interconnected to this one girl named Holly. And these POVs take place over the course of about 40, 50 years. It is a wide scope book, but David Mitchell makes it feel that each POV is so unique, specific, not just in terms of region, dialect, person. Everything about them was unique, and it felt a little bit jarring when you would go from one POV to the next, but once you knew that that was going to be the case throughout the course of the book, it really just was a wild ride. I didn't know how I felt about this book when I finished it. I loved certain POVs, but then I had a really great conversation on the channel with Joanna from Joanna Reads and Jimmy from the Fantasy Network. I'll link it. And that really enlightened me as to how others could perceive the ending of this book, and it made me feel slightly better about it overall. I think I ended up giving the book a 4.25 on Goodreads, and I really did love this book. If you are looking for a book that will take you on a journey of hatred, despair, love, just twisted emotions, feeling like you are enraged with humanity, thinking about what you can do to make you a better person, then the Bone Clocks is definitely something that should be on your radar. I've been also told that I should check out Cloud Atlas by David Mitchell, so maybe I'll be doing that at some point this year. But please give the Bone Clocks a try. I don't feel like it gets the praise that it deserves on our corner of BookTube, and it really should be talked about more. All right, y'all, we're getting into some romantasy here. The first romantasy book that made my top 5, it's gonna be no surprise, is A Court of Mist and Fury, which is book 2 of the ACOTAR series. I love this book, and it's hilarious because one of my friends has been reading it now, and she's hating it, and I've been getting her updates, and I still love that people will hate read this book, love read this book, whatever, just read this book. It is such a fun book. I felt like the first ACOTAR book was fine. It was a fairy tale retelling, but when we get to book 2, really, this is when this series for me just started to shine. The found family trope was so excellently done. I liked the world. I liked the courts that she developed, the characters. You saw that there was forethought given to things that occurred in book 1. It just felt like a good time. This book I've reread 3 times since February. It's April 9th. It's April 9th, and I have reread this book 3 times just because I've had a great time with it, and I can't wait to read it again. If this book isn't my top book of the year, I won't be surprised, just because by the end of the year, I probably will have read it 10 times. But I had a blast with this book. I've talked about it endlessly on the channel. If you want to hear more about my ACOTAR experience, I can link the video that I talked about my journey with reading ACOTAR for the first time. But seriously, please do give it a try. I know that a lot of people really like to rag on Sarah J. Maas, saying that it's just smut. It's not. There's a lot more going on in these books. Yes, there are, of course, some intimate moments, but in reality, there really is so much more going on, and I loved this book. It's not clear. I just loved it. I had so much fun. Now, the next book is my last non-romantasy for the top 5, and it was The Lies of Lamura by Scott Lynch. I had a really great time with this. I had a bunch of people telling me that they thought I would really like The Lies of Lamura. The person that was probably on that soapbox the most and the loudest was Joanna, which I appreciated, and she really pushed me to read it. So I ended up really enjoying this story. I felt like at times it had a Pirates of the Caribbean type vibe in terms of time period of where we were. Scott Lynch's prose were just great. The humor was spot on. I really liked the ways in which he told the story. Father James was one of my favorite characters that I've come across in a really long time. And I just really, really enjoyed this. I love humor in a book, and when humor can be done well, that's my favorite. This was a prime example of humor being done well, and all the while the story still feeling like a very smart story. So if you're looking for a found family Robin Hood-esque type story, Lies of Lamura might be for you. Not so Robin Hood in the sense that they're doing it for other people, but more so in the fact that there's thievery. That might be a good choice for you. The last book of my top 5 for Q1 is going to be A Shadow in the Ember by Jennifer L. Armentrout. This is the first book of the Flesh and Fire series, and boy did I love this book. It introduces us to Nyktos, the primal of death. It introduces us to Seraphina, who is our badass female character, and their story, and it was just so well done. I can't really give away too much of this plot because it all gets really spoilery, but if you're looking for a perfect romantasy book, this really is it. And if you're looking for something with spice in it, even better. Highly recommend this book. It was the 4th book by Jennifer Armentrout that I had read. I liked the first 3, didn't love them, loved this book. It was so fun. The trilogy as a whole is excellent. Cannot wait to read more of it this year. The next one is supposed to be coming out in August. Really so much fun. Had such a good time with it. Now I have one more book that is an honorary mention, and typically I don't like to do 2 books of the same author in a top 5 and a top 10, anything like that. I like to give a wider perspective, but I wanted to mention the 5th book in the ACOTAR series, A Court of Silver Flame, and the reason that is because there were themes touched upon in that book that have stuck with me. And I don't cry when I read, and that book made me cry. Now, as I said earlier with the Akamath book by Sarah J. Maas. People like to rag on her for it just being smut and mindless. Fine. Sarah J. Maas actually tackles very difficult tropes in some of her books, and she does this especially well in this 5th installment in the Avatar series. And those tropes specifically are abuse and sexual assault. Like, and PTSD from sexual assault. There was one scene in particular that a female character is telling another female character about her experience of being assaulted, and it evoked something so deeply in me that it made me want to just tell every woman to read it, because we all know someone that has been touched by either verbal assault as a woman or sexual assault as a woman. And it is one of those things that unfortunately the world is continuously plagued by, and very few people talk about them and do it in a way that I think is appropriate. And she did it in such a beautiful way in this book. So I really wanted to give credence to that. I wanted to mention it just to highlight the fact that I really loved that book as well. In terms of channel things that have happened in Q1, I had a couple of love bomb chats that happened earlier this year. I had one with my husband, Mr. Fantasy Awash, and I had a second one with Nicole from the Fantasy Fangirls podcast, which unfortunately my video stopped working in the middle of, which was so annoying. I also had a couple of chats in general on the channel. I had one with Red by Kyle about Warbreaker. I had Jimmy and Joanna on for the Bone Clocks discussion. And I also had, I think, it was Q1 that I had these two. I had Bookborn on for a love bomb chat and Murphy Napier on for a love bomb chat. So really, I've had a great Q1 in terms of conversations with people, books that have been read, discussions that have been had. It's been really fun. I'm looking forward to seeing what Q2 is going to bring. I already know what one of my top 5 books for Q2 is going to be, because I read one last week and it was a banger, and I can't wait to talk about it. But that video is going to have to wait. If this is your first time here, welcome to Fantasy Awash, where I talk about fantasy, and lately it's been a lot of romantasy. I like to get into the nitty-gritty of all things books, all things fantasy, all things romantasy. It's become my new personality, and I'm just living with it, and it's been great. I had a wonderful Q1. Let me know in the comments down below what some of your top books from Q1 were. If there's anything that you're looking forward to reading in Q2, anything that you think I should read in Q2, I want to hear about it. If you want to follow me on Instagram or Goodreads as well, the information for that is in the description box down below. If you want to help support the channel, you can always hit like and subscribe. I appreciate you spending your time with me as always, and I'll see you next time. Bye.